Good morning. It's so great to see everybody happy and smiling in their places. I hope everybody enjoyed the lovely dinner that we had last night. Please, if we could give a quick thank you to all the folks from the programming committee that worked, especially led by Jennifer Kimball, for putting together a fantastic dinner. I think if everybody that attended would agree. So thank you so much for that, Jennifer. So we have a really great panel coming up. I'm sure they'll be appropriately introduced when the time comes. I just wanted to make sure again to say that we're really pleased to see so many people out here this morning, and just quickly to make sure to mention that we hope everybody stays all the way through and goes through to here at the end. We're going to be having the Founders Awards, which we really are honored to have those people in our presence. And I just wanted to mention, while we're all here, to make sure that everybody really takes some time to get to know a new person in IWIRC. Go and meet somebody that's here that you don't have any idea who they are, and try to find out something about them. Right now, everybody would agree, I think, that our area is sort of struggling a bit, and a lot of people are looking for opportunities, and you never know where that next opportunity might come from. And so it really doesn't hurt to get to know one extra person who might be that key to that fantastic extra job that you're looking for, or that extra case that'll help boost your hours, or a new path forward to some other place. So please take the time to do that. I know it sounds silly, but it really makes a huge difference, and you never know who you're going to meet and who you're going to, where that will lead you. So please take the opportunity to do that. Everybody that's in this room can offer somebody else in this room something. And so it's really just up to you all to sort of figure out what that is and make the best that you can of it. There are lots of individuals that we have from all over the country, and then also all over the world. We have several people here from Germany, and it's fantastic to see the big contingency that's here. So get to know all of those folks as well. I couldn't be prouder of the programming that's coming up. I'm really pleased with that, and I will not hold it up any longer and let us get started. Jennifer Kimball's going to come up and get us going. And if you need to come and go, you can do so. I would say at the very least, if you could try to do it from the outside rows so that we're not sort of coming up back and forth during the program, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Jennifer Kimball, and I'm the Programs Director for IWIRC. I want to welcome you all to the 12th Annual Spring Meeting and Founders Awards. It's so lovely to see you all here, and especially to see so many new faces and first-time conference attendees in the room. So welcome to you all. Without further ado, I'm happy to present our first panel to you, Prepping for the Pitch. Our moderator is Ms. Teresa Cole, who is with SSG Capital, and we will turn it over to Teresa to introduce the panelists and get us started.
Thanks, Jennifer. I would like to thank the programming committee and Margie and the whole team for coming up with a great topic, putting together a wonderful group of people, coordinating it, getting us all to commit, and then telling us it was going to be recorded. So well played. Our panel this morning includes Melissa Hager from Morrison Foerster. Melissa celebrated her birthday 2 years ago playing rugby in Galway, Ireland. Pretty cool. Josie Parisi from BDO in Canada. Josie's goal is to visit 50 countries by the time she's 50, and she's on 44 already. And she hates to fly. Very impressive.
And she's only 20, so she's
exactly.
going to get it done.
The legendary Holly Etlin from Alex Partners.
That means old.
Vintage, who has a tendency to come across as intimidating and frightening, but is really a girly girl. Ask her about gardening and cooking. And Denise Del Powell from Burf and Foreman, who told me this morning that she's become her mother.
My mother shops on the internet for makeup, and I'm doing that now. It's very scary. It's frightening, actually.
And you say that like it's a bad thing.
Isn't that what conference calls are for?
Yes, that's one thing I learned this morning.
Right?
Yes.
Right. Show of hands in the room. Who has shopped on a conference call? We'll keep it in the vault.
Absolutely.
Okay?
What happens in DC stays in DC.
Exactly. So you can see where this discussion is going to go this morning. We have a lot of material we're going to cover, but we thought we would start with lead questions for each panelist. We encourage you to participate in the dialogue. We would like to have each of the panelists respond to the topic initially, but please feel free to contribute. So getting started, Holly, what are some of the differences between getting the lead, for instance, a company or a debtor side deal, and chasing the lead, like a committee case or an ad hoc or third party? And how does the type of opportunity influence the preparation?
Wow, big question. Multi-part. So in respect to committees versus company side engagements, there are a lot of commonalities in that the one commonality is understand who the decision makers are going to be. Obviously, in a committee case, you're not entirely going to be sure about that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it's really important to understand who the decision makers really are in the situation, and that you are going to, if the first time you're going to be meeting with them is going to be actually the pitch, that you're pitching to what it is they're thinking the situation is versus what you think the situation is. In particular, company management never anticipates. I think I've had one pitch in my entire 30 year career that where the management team actually was reconciled to filing. Every other management team, including those that literally were out of cash, thought that they were going to be able to do something else. So never a good idea to sit down with a pitch book or a presentation that leads with bankruptcy preparation, that kind of thing. So the committee chasing is very different. The things that I can do are different than what the lawyers in the room can do. I can cold call the top 20, or I can use my partners to make those introductions, which you can do, anyone can do. You can use your connections. It's all about LinkedIn. How many people are on LinkedIn? Well, the one useful thing about LinkedIn or Google in these days is you can look up all of the top 20, figure out where you might have a connection, and get that connection to then introduce you so that you can make conversations in advance, if they will speak with you, with every one of the top 20 creditors. It's about building the coalition and making the touch so that you're not going in cold. The best firms that pitch, for example, creditors committees, they know that they've got 1 or 2 votes lined up in the room no matter who gets on among the top 10. And that leads to at least getting in the room, which is, frankly, one of the keys, I think, for everybody is getting into the room.
Melissa, why don't you talk about that a little bit, getting in the room? What's the secret?
The secret is whatever works for you, and it's a little bit different for each person, I think. But to Holly's point, you need to make the connection. You need to reach out to clients of the firm, connections within the firm. You could have an attorney in the firm who's a roommate with the GC at one of the top 20 creditors, top 10 creditors, and you need to make that connection. I think, and you need to reach out, and before you reach out to them, you need to know what the case is about. You need to identify the opportunity and understand what the case is about. If you just call somebody up, even if you have a connection and attorneys cannot cold call, you have to have an idea about where you're going with the case, and you have to have the right experience there. You also have to make sure that that the whole case isn't going to be about suing creditor X, Y, or Z to avoid a lien and things like that, and finding out, oh, that's a client of our firm. So you need to do the research beforehand, and I think one of the biggest things, important ways to make the connection too is about 7 years ago, I came over to Morrison & Foerster, and I came over from a firm where we did almost exclusively committee work. And I think a lot of people who do committee work and are in the bankruptcy field understand the benefits of being on a committee. You understand what it means, what responsibilities you have. But when I came over to MoFo, they had some committee experience, but not as much. So when you get that list of top 20, 30 creditors, and you run it through conflicts, and you find out you have relationship partners or partners with firms, you need to educate them as well as the client about the benefits of serving on a committee, because they hear bankruptcy and they think, oh, that's a bad word. Bankruptcy's bad. I want to stay away from it as far as I can. But from a creditor's perspective, there are very tangible benefits to serving on a committee. A couple of them is that you get to have impact and steer the opportunity of the case. Also, you get to have non-public information that clearly you cannot use in the case to your advantage, but it gives you a long-term relationship with the debtor on the other side or have a better understanding of the industry. So you need to educate your colleagues, your partners, as well as the clients about the benefit of serving on a committee and asking, if they will, to consider you and providing them with your pitch materials and getting the opportunity to support you for a committee opportunity, as well as get in the room and show them what you can do.
Now, Denise, how is that different when you're representing secured creditors?
I think the difference is with a secured creditor is very relationship driven, and many times by the time the case is filed, they've already identified who their counsel is. But there are times when they haven't, and maybe I had a case where I had been involved in a bankruptcy with the same principal, and the debtor's counsel called and said, hey, I don't know if you have a relationship with this lender, but here are the dynamics. And I was able to get in the door to handle the secure representation of the secured lender, and I parlayed that into $1 million a year client for mine. And so it goes back to what I think we're kind of saying is use those relationships. And to touch on one of Melissa's points, I had a deal where we had a relationship with the unsecured creditor, but he was one of the smallest ones. And one of my partners said, well, we're never going to get it because they're one of the bottom ones. That's usually the unsecured creditor with the largest claim. I said, who cares? Let's just go pitch it. Well, it turned out that this small creditor had a very big voice, and we got the representation. So every opportunity, you may not get the representation, but it's the opportunity to get in front of people and to start making those relationships. And you talked about LinkedIn. Surprisingly enough, people are looking more at LinkedIn. And just as a practice pointer, get in there and update your profile. It's more important today than you would think. People aren't just looking at our bios on our websites. They're going to other sources to see where else we are. So it takes time. I finally did it the other day. But it's a source that people are using.
Just in time.
Exactly. I knew I was going to sit here and give you this advice, so I had to follow my own before I sat down.
Yeah, mine is totally not up to date, but I would agree. And by the way, don't be afraid to ask your friends. I mean, do you know how many calls, everybody thinks, oh, Holly Atlin, right? I get calls from friends at firms who are pitching things in the industry, in retail, asking me my opinion about the company, about the creditors to the company, if I can introduce them. And you know what? I'm happy to do it. So don't always think sort of linearly. Think about 2 steps to get to somebody.
I'm glad you said that because I was worried those calls were getting a little excessive. So thank you.
To Holly's point, we recently in Canada, I'm the token Canadian on the panel. Recently in Canada, there's been a big case involving a large retailer, a US-based retailer, and there's been a lot of media regarding one set of creditors who hasn't been represented. And we made a cold call. We found a connection within our firm to someone who was one of those creditors. And they helped us organize the rest of that group of creditors, and we went to court, and we got standing in court. And it was really about educating ourselves, doing the research, and then asking. So these people were unorganized before, didn't really know that they had a standing, and it was because of our research and our preparedness that we got them some standing.
And also the benefit of not being an attorney like us that has to be a little bit
Well,
more careful.
absolutely.
But
Yeah, that's our benefit.
Yeah, but
is
with social media
Agreed.
and internet the way it is, it's the 6 degrees of separation thing.
Agreed.
I would argue that any lawyer in the country can get to any potential client in the country within 2 to 3 phone calls. And you should make those calls. Everybody, the people who are successful, the rainmakers, that's exactly what they do.
Josie brings up a good point, though. There are a lot of interested parties involved in these matters, and it's fairly clear-cut how you would go after the debtor, how you would go after the secured creditor or the committee. What about some of these ad hoc committees, especially if there is a particularly aggressive shadow bank type lender involved, or if there are a group of retirees? What do you have to do to go after that kind of business?
Oh, and she's looking at me. Because I'm thinking given that I'm company side most of the time, I'm thinking, boo hiss. Now there's going to be one more set of professionals pissing my money down the drain.
We're making your life easier, we're streamlining it so that you know who to talk to.
Or adding value to the case.
Yes, we're adding value to the case. But I mean, that is by the way, that is, for those of you who don't do company side work, that's exactly the reaction of management. That always is the reaction of management. And so then what we have to do is educate management to the fact that they can actually be a valuable voice if they're educated about the situation and understand and can come to support management's point and management and the board's point of view. But I think, you know, increasingly those types of groups are being heard. For example, we have had in retail cases the gift card folks and their representations, you know, and other kinds of ad hoc creditor groups. You know, chasing them is really understanding how you would reach out to them, because, you know, it only takes, again, to your point, it only takes one creditor with a fairly strong voice, as opposed to the largest creditor who, for whatever reason, doesn't necessarily want to speak up. So often, finding that individual who has some experience or has an issue sufficient to cause them to want to speak up in the situation is going to be the key.
Josie.
Yeah.
So you get an opportunity.
Yes.
How do you decide if it's a real opportunity for you that you could actually pitch? If it is, what's your next step? If it isn't, what do you do next?
Well, if it's a real opportunity, I think the first thing we want to do is understand whether we have the qualifications. Without the qualifications and putting yourself out there, I think you're, number one, you're setting yourself up for failure, and it could be a disaster. And then you may be setting up the wrong perception of your firm and of yourself. If you go in there completely unprepared, not knowing the situation, not knowing the nuances of a particular industry, you end up looking really unprofessional and a bit needy. And I think that that can come back to hurt you in the sense that when there is an opportunity that you might be qualified for, that may have set the wrong tone and you may not be considered again. So I think that's the first thing you need to understand is, are you qualified? Just because there is an opportunity out there, it might not be the right reason for you to go after it if you don't have the qualifications or the experience or the bench strength to actually go ahead and do a good job.
Those were the days when you didn't have the bandwidth.
But when there is an opportunity and it is a good opportunity and you have the right experience, you have the right people, you have the right bench strength, I think you have to make the contact and ask for the work. And I think all too often we don't ask for the work and we don't follow up. I think that's key, is if you show your client or your potential client that you really are interested in helping them and that you can bring something to the table and you have been creative and that you have had successes in the past, then that's really your pitch, and I think that's where you'll be most successful.
Well, but none of us came to this profession because we wanted to be salespeople, and isn't that the hard part? That's really the hard part.
Yeah.
You have. You know, I came to this profession because I truly believed in helping retailers reorganize themselves and save the business. That's truly what I believe and what I have done. But that didn't make me a great salesperson. And learning to actually make the ask is really important.
I think too, I mean, starting off as an accountant and going into accounting, a lot of us accountants are introverted. And we like to sit at our cubbyhole. But as you progress through your career and you gain the experience and you gain confidence, you tend to want to go and get the job, see what you're made of, show yourself, and if not other people, that you are experienced, you are successful, and you can bring something to the table.
Well, and that's always the balancing act. You know you can do it, but maybe you don't have all the qualifications yet. How far do you push that, Denise?
I mean, I think it's go to your comfort zone. There can be times when, listen, we don't know everything. There's none of us who are sitting on this panel in the audience who do. It's all a learning process. But you have to know enough to be able to handle the engagement. And there's certain things that maybe we wouldn't do, but we have other people in our firm that we could bring in to bridge that gap. But I think the worst thing that you can do is to take on a representation that you're not qualified for, because it's a pretty small community and people hear things. And so I see people out there doing that, and they're taking on a case that's either beyond their experience level or their expertise in a particular industry, and it's only going to come back to hurt you. But when you have that opportunity and you decide, you know what, I'm really not qualified, and I don't have anybody in my firm, that's an opportunity for you to take that and to go and learn that.
Yeah.
And but I won't take something on that I don't think that I can do, that I'm not qualified for, that I can't learn through the process.
The other part of that too is understanding what your limitations are. But there might be someone within your firm that doesn't have those limitations. So if you have the personal connection or the contact, and then you draw upon other resources in your firm who actually have the right experience, then that's a recipe for success.
It's creating the team.
Exactly.
Right. Which we're going to get to in a minute.
Yes, we
So any other comments on that topic, which I think we have covered all of our material on identifying the opportunity. All right, so we know what the opportunity is. We're going to go after it. Melissa, what does the research process entail, and how much contact can you anticipate and or need with the interested parties, including other professionals, during the preparation?
Sure, and I've touched upon this a little bit earlier because our conversation is an open dialogue here. But once you identify who the stakeholders are, whether it be an ad hoc, you figure out who's holding the debt, or you have the top 20 or 30 creditors of a list from an attorney's perspective, and I don't think a financial advisor's is really any different. You go through the channels at your firm that you have to figure out where there's contacts within your firm or personal relationships. You also reach out to, frankly, I find one of the best in a committee case call where you're potentially pitching the committee, one of the best first calls to make is to somebody at the debtor's firm that you know well enough to basically say, hey, what's this about? I saw you just filed this. Who's involved? Who's actually who represents the top creditors? Are they planning on serving? What's your game plan here? And most of the debtors' attorneys will be very forthcoming and give you information of that nature, tell you what the case is about. One of the cases I got years ago was because I reached out to a debtor's attorney in California. I didn't even know him very well, but everybody's a small bar to some degree, and basically said, hey, we're looking at this case, what can you tell me about it? And through that conversation, I figured out that there was a really big IRS issue. And so I ran down that research on that, and during the pitch, we brought this up, and we had a game plan with it, and that was something that I think was very favorable in us getting the committee on that case. So you should really reach out to as many people that whether it be debtors, financial advisors for the company, even financial advisors and the usual suspects that show up at pitches. Indentured trustees council, let's face it, there's a handful of indentured trustees. We all know that they typically use a few shops. Call them up, ask them about it. I saw this. Well, do you think your client is going to seek to serve on the committee? If so, we're really looking at this. We think we have great credentials and we'd really like an opportunity. So I think the more contact and the more people that you reach out to, it's great. And I think you do your research, whether through Google searches, LinkedIn, and otherwise. There is a fine line when you can harass someone too much. And I think if you send an email and follow up with a phone call and somebody doesn't get back to you, unless you have a very close personal relationship with them, I don't think you want to harass people. But you really need to reach out, find out the information on the case. And also, as I pointed out earlier, you also need to make sure you're not going to be in an adversarial position where you can't take the case on. Because if that's pitching a committee case, as I'm sure most of us here know, it's a lot of work. You've got to read through all the first days, the declarations, do a lot of work, prepare a committee pitch book. And the worst thing you want to do is go through all of that and then find out that you have a relationship that you can't, that precludes you from pursuing it, either technically or just from another sort of more political viewpoint, or that you don't have the right team, or that you don't have the right bandwidth or bench strength to do it. So, and attorneys, we touched upon this a little bit. Attorneys have to be a little bit more careful about cold calling. There are ethical and professional rules that preclude us from cold calling unless we have a personal relationship there. But to Holly's point, if you do your diligence, you can usually find a connection or have somebody make an introduction. And there's also been times where in smaller debtor cases, if you reach out to the debtors, if they have creditors that call them up and want to know more, they can refer them to you, which is another great way to get involved in a case.
But I say too, if you're doing the committee, there's times, particularly those of us who are in big firms, that there's going to be conflicts. Identify those up front and have a solution. And that's with committee representation or with trustee representation. And if you know you're going to have a conflict, team up with maybe it's adversary proceedings, fraudulent transfers. You know that you represent banks, and so you're not going to be able to sue certain banks. Be able to tell the trustee or that, hey, we can't do this, but here's this other firm that I know you've done a lot of work with. They do not have these conflicts, and I've done that in a case and been very successful in getting the representation. But make sure if you have those issues, to address them up front so that you're not having to address them on the back end.
Well, and the conflict check is always an interesting process. Being in a very small firm, our conflict check is somewhat informal. It basically consists of, Scott, do we have a conflict? No, Teresa, we're fine. However,
we're not attorneys. What are conflicts? Come on now, let's
exactly. But Holly and Josie, what's the conflict check process like for both of you? Big firms, lots and lots of deals. How excruciating is it?
It's excruciating.
Yeah, well, a little bit different in Alex Partners than BDO, only because we were built to be a restructuring firm originally, and we've added on the extra businesses along the way. Now, 80% of our business is not restructuring, but we built the systems, and so we have a whole team internally that does this. But yeah, and the key issue for us is always not getting the conflicts check done, but determining that we actually have an appropriate list. Because there's always, oh yeah, the oh yeahs. Oh yeah, I forgot this one on the list. Oh, I forgot that one on the list. You know, and I was 23 years at Deloitte, so I know the process in an accounting firm, and particularly then speaking to line partners and trying to convince them that it's really not a conflict for you to take on the work. But now that we have a much larger and more diverse firm, it's not all that different at Alex Partners, other than it's relatively efficient, I think. The one thing that I did want to add with regard to the research process is find the person in your network who always seems to know something about everything, be it an industry-based person. I have an investment banker friend. He knows the scuttlebutt on who holds the debt in every situation because he's always pitching restructurings. And this guy works the phones. I think he spends all day on the phone. Okay, I really do. But he always knows something, and I can count on being able to call him and say, well, what about this situation? And he says, well, you know, I was having lunch yesterday with this other person, and they said that the debt had just traded, and now this is the holder. And so you need to have those people in your network. In retail, guess who I call? I called my friends liquidators. Why? Because they always have their ear to the ground with what's going on with the company. Always, always, always. And I get great information when I'm chasing a retailer from them. They've walked the stores. They know the condition of the inventory because they're doing the appraisals for the banks.
Yep.
You know, it's amazing that the sort of ancillary areas you can find out, and what they can do is give you that extra little piece of information about the company that you might not have had otherwise, like your comment on the IRS claim, that will then resonate with the people that you're pitching to.
In our firm, our conflict search mechanism, just to get back to conflict search, is to submit a formal claim, a formal request. You go through your time and billing program to see if there are any direct hits. But the difficulty is there may be some other related companies that you're doing work that haven't been identified. And you start down the road of doing the work, and then someone says, hey, I heard that you're doing some work for this particular person. Did you know that we do this? And then now you've become embarrassed because you've started providing advice. You may have compromised your position, and it's embarrassing. Another interesting conflict that we've been having recently is I've been working on a file for just over 2 years, and there's a large claims process that's involving lien claimants. Prior to the liens being put on, our firm had been pursuing the audit of a very large lien claimant, and we were successful. Now I'm on the other side of the table where I'm adjudicating their claim, and they're putting pressure on the audit partners to say, hey, why isn't she not moving this forward? Why is she saying this? And why is she saying that this is not lienable? And those types of conflicts. And that's where you're not only having the external issue, you're having the internal issue. And when you have a large lien claimant like the one that we have, who is not very happy, they tend to speak out. And then that just can add to a little bit of reputational risk. So the conflict issue is much more beyond whether you're doing work for a client specifically at this time, but understanding who you're running after, who your firm is trying to get as a client as well. And that's where I find the most difficulty, because after you start down a road of working for someone and then you find out that you may have compromised them or yourselves, and it's a bit embarrassing.
And it's also important, to Holly's point, to know sort of the one person in the industry that knows everything. There's usually a couple people within your firm that know everything that's going on about everything, and it's so important to reach out to them. And usually they're involved, but they'll, like, a lot of times they'll be like, no, we can't do that because X, Y, and Z, and it doesn't show up. So it's very important to keep the internal communications open as well. I mean, it sounds, you know, just common sense, but as you're in the fury of trying to get information and get going and sort of get ahead of the group, it makes sense to sort of step back and figure out who's the 5-6 key people and phone calls I should make now to make sure that this is a good use of our time and resources.
The other side of that too is using your risk people, is making a phone call to your risk department and saying, these are the issues, help us work through it, because you may perceive a risk, but there technically is not a risk, and if you can disclose it to both parties, you may be able to get beyond that if it's not a true technical conflict.
So circling back to contact with the potential opportunity for a minute, Melissa, you had some insight on universal building products.
Universal building products is a case I think attorneys have certainly all heard, and that's a 2010 decision by Judge Walrath in Delaware, where counsel, local and counsel for the committee, was disqualified based upon pre-petition activities. And the facts are generally this, and this goes to the cold call of attorneys. It was a bankruptcy filing that had a lot of foreign creditors in China, I believe. And a couple of the firms did what they always do and what some of us in this room get on a regular basis, and took the top 20 list, sent it out to contacts saying, hey, you know, this just filed, let us know if we can help you, et cetera. And as part of that process, they sent it to a gentleman who they'd previously worked with as an interpreter, a Chinese interpreter in bankruptcy cases where there were Chinese creditors. And he looked at the list and said, I don't know anyone, but essentially started, based upon the record at the hearing, essentially started reaching out to the creditors on the list and effectively cold calling on behalf of the law firms. And ultimately there was, in connection with the committee's retention, and I think it's important to note that prior to the retention there were some contested matters on DIP and other things that there was where there was a lot of conflict going back and forth early on in the case between the debtors and the committee. As part of the retention process, the U.S. Trustee's Office as well as the debtors objected to the retention based upon breach of ethical, failure to disclose in accordance with the bankruptcy rules. And Judge Walrath looked at everything. She sort of said, listen, sending the list of creditors out to people you have contacts with, that's fine. That's okay. That's general practice, et cetera. But where they went beyond, which ended up in their disqualification, was the fact that in her view, the attorneys had essentially directed this third person to cold call on the attorney's behalf to creditors who ultimately, and I guess I left out a couple of important facts, who ultimately were appointed on the committee and elected these two law firms in I think a unanimous vote. So attorneys have to be just very careful of understanding the rules. There's ABA model rules, there's professional rules of responsibility in each jurisdiction. You just have to be careful of those and make sure that you're not running afoul of those, because not only will you get disqualified from the case, it could obviously hurt your career and your licensing as well. So that's something, as part of the organization process, you really just need to know the rules and understand what jurisdiction you're in and things like that.
Now, do you really think that the debtor actually was concerned about the conflict, or this was retaliation associated with the contentiousness of the early portion of the case?
I'm not sure. I wasn't involved in the case, but I'm sure that had they been, walking hand in hand, singing "Kumbaya," there may not have been, through the case. I don't think that there would have been as much issue. But obviously, the U.S. trustee as a watchdog has responsibilities as well. So and I think the U.S. trustee was certainly, leading the charge on a lot of this. But to your point, that it could have had a different potential result if it hadn't. But those are the type of things that are supposed to be disclosed in the declarations that are filed with the bankruptcy court, and I think that was also a problem as well.
Okay, any other comments from the panel on making contact? So we've identified the opportunity, we've made contact. Now, Denise, how do you position your firm for a pitch, and what factors and considerations come into play for your preparation?
There's a lot of factors. Some are more important than others, but I think probably the two most important are going to be your experience with the type of, whether it's the secured creditor, committee, trustee, and every firm is organized differently, but what we've tried to do as a firm is identify those folks that within the firm that have a lot of committee representation, have done a lot of trustee representation, and then with the secured creditor, just sort of had a lead person with different secured creditors so that we can be very nimble, meaning that if the opportunity arises, we're not scrambling to identify these folks at the last minute. And that goes also with industry, because it can be very important to know the industry. I did a case years ago that was a garment manufacturer, and we had folks within the firm who had that manufacturing experience, who had experience representing publicly traded companies. We had corporate lawyers who had experience doing large APAs, and so we put together that team that, again, and I think, Melissa, you touched on this, we identified what the needs were going to be so that we can make the pitch, and I think that's very important. We talked a little bit about, identified geographic. I think geographic has become much less important as part of the process. If you go in, it's nice that you know the judges, but frankly, a lot of us know a lot of the judges. We come to these type things, in ABI and NCBJ, and we know a lot of the judges. So I think experience is going to be what makes the day for us. Credibility, and this touches on some of the things that we've talked about, meaning if you don't know about the business you're pitching or don't have the expertise, don't do it, or bring other people in the firm who have that experience, because it will impact your credibility, and not just in the pitch you're making, but in future pitches. When you're putting together your pitch team, think about, too, and we touched on this, think about people within the industry. In other words, you're pitching for the creditor committee representation, where you know that you're going to need other professionals, you're going to need Holly, and so identify those folks up front who can be a part of the team and make that suggestion when you're moving forward.
Great.
Yeah, actually, I thought that you touched on a very good thing. For research, if you're a lawyer, call the financial advisor firms that are likely to be pitching. That most of us are very happy to share our research with the law firms, and we're going to be doing the same. We're going to be calling the people we know that are in the law firms that are likely to be pitching and listening to what they have to say. You're not competing against them, and you can get a lot of great information that way, and they can leverage what you've done, and you can leverage what they've done.
So Holly, what advice do you have for all the firms that aren't Alex partners when it comes to pitching against a large firm?
I wasn't always with Alex Partners. You know that. I was with a firm for 4 years called Crossroads, which no longer exists. But at that time, we were, I think we were 35 people, but we had a claims business and a couple of other things. So maybe our restructuring team was 15, 20 people. You know, if you are a small firm and you're pitching against a much larger firm, obviously you can potentially compete on rate. But I think the most important thing is competing on the personal touch and attention that the case will receive within your firm. What we always used at Crossroads against the big firms was the fact that this particular case was a much bigger deal to us than it was to the much larger firms, and that therefore it would get the attention of our top partners. And I pitched and won a lot of committee work when I was with Crossroads, and so that was, I think, an important aspect. It's not the thing that puts you necessarily over the top, but it is a way to kind of blunt the issue of the large versus small firm issue.
We're a large firm, but we're a small large firm. And one of the things that we like to bring to the table is that we have offices in 103 cities within Canada. So wherever the problem may be for a secured lender, we likely have a presence there. We have boots on the ground. Those rates are likely less costly than the ones in Toronto, and we have people present on a daily basis who can deal with the issues and do the day-to-day things that you don't actually need, the more expensive professionals out there.
Now, Melissa, when you're pitching a committee, depending on the industry, there are certain firms that typically get selected for those opportunities. What goes into your preparation so that you give yourself a real shot at getting that kind of deal?
A lot of things. Number one, knowing the case. If you don't know the case and you don't know the issues, you might as well not show up. Number two is making the connections, reaching out to people, figuring out who is going to be there, figure out who is going to seek to serve, who doesn't have enough, involvement in the case, or if for a trade creditor who may be taken out on a critical vendor. Figuring out who the audience is going to be beforehand. Obviously, there's been plenty of pitches where we've gone in and we thought we had some support, but there's an ad hoc committee beforehand, and based upon the composition of the trustee by the U.S. composition of the committee by the U.S. Trustee's Office, you then get a great opportunity because they switch up a couple of the ad hoc committee members. So you need to know who potentially is going to be on there and what their issues are. You need to know your audience. You need to reach out and let people know about your experience that, listen, we have great experience in financial services. We have retail experience. We have residential mortgage experience from ResCap, and really make sure that your experience shines through.
And that's the key. How do you differentiate your firm during the preparation?
We basically say, here's the cases we've been in, here's the results we've achieved, we know this, we can hit the ground running, and the other, that's what stands us apart. I mean, I think we try to focus on us rather than our competitors, because I don't think saying, X, Y, and Z firm doesn't have that experience. I think you focus on the positives rather than negatives, but you basically point to cases, point to the fact that you've worked with the debtor's attorneys, worked with the financial advisors in other cases and had great results, that you know the judge, that you know how the case is going to probably go, and that you can hit the ground running. I think that's what distinguishes you by a proven track record, and the fact that Morrison & Foerster is a, multinational firm where we have offices all over and we have areas of expertise from everything from, intellectual property, tax, corporate, to issues all over. I think that that's really what sets you apart, and you focus and highlight on that, and then focus on how you would use that experience with the particular issues in this case to devise a strategy based upon publicly available information to get this case over on track.
Now, I would do one little twist to that.
Okay.
And that is, when you have been involved in a big case and you have played a significant role in that big case, and you know that there were 53 other firms involved in that case, then they are all going to list that case on their quals, you better make sure that in the pitch somebody says, We were involved in this, as many firms were, but we played this significant role in this case.
Yeah, we were the lead. We were, we were the
We had
primary
the committee,
driver.
not an individual creditor.
Agreed.
We had the secured lenders.
We represented the trustee and handled this significant litigation that brought
Right.
in how much money
Because
into the
in the
estate.
larger cases, everybody's going to have it on their piece of paper.
So who's responsible for wrangling all of this information? How much of the preparation do each of you do yourselves? Do you have a team that does that? And where does all of this research come from?
Well, I think there's two things. I think, first of all, within the firm, knowing who has the expertise, let's just be honest, we're not as busy as we've been in the past, and this is a great opportunity to position yourself so when the opportunity arises, you're not scrambling to pull together of who has the hospitality experience. And I'm not just saying in bankruptcy, corporate, real estate, who has the manufacturing experience, again, bankruptcy, all the different areas, so that when you have the opportunity to make the pitch, that you have all that information easily at hand. I mean, on our firm, we have a librarian, and she is fabulous. And so she's the person I call. Here's what I need. Then reaching out to the people you know within the industry and the people you've done business with, and just having that organized up front so you know who's going to call. And we all have, firms do it differently, people do it differently. When I have contact with someone, when I put them into Outlook, I put the case that I was involved in, what their role was. And frankly, if I got personal information, they have children, whatever I think is going to help differentiate me. And also remember, we come across a lot of people within our business. But think about that too, because people like to know that you remember personal information about them. So that's how I tend to organize those type contacts.
We do something similar. I think we have a core group of committee attorneys that would do the lead work on it and make sure you can call from other areas of expertise in the firm. One of the things that we did about 5, maybe 6 years ago was we had a new position open up for a business development, essentially manager director, who's a former attorney from a very strong bankruptcy firm, who oversees all of this and is the one who puts the final touches on the pitch book and the presentation materials and gets it. And sometimes does some of the summaries. So, and that is definitely a really great thing to have. I recognize that we're a bigger firm that we have that, but I think there is a growing trend of firms to go more that way, where you have somebody who is a business development person who's responsible for doing that type of stuff, understands the industry, understands the internal flow of information and how to get, pitch books copied magically in minutes and things like that, which is the little things that you don't and has it, look very pretty from an electronic format. But I think you look at the case, there's probably a core group that will typically handle committee cases, and depending upon which industry, because every industry has expertise, and then call upon specific areas where we have other individuals who we've sort of opened up to the wonderful world of committee work, who don't necessarily think it's the wild, wild west anymore, and like working on committee cases, bring them in, get their viewpoints, have associates summarize the key motions to include in the pitch book, because pitch books are a necessary evil. Half the time, I think committee members don't even really look at them, but if you don't have one, it's not good, it doesn't make sense. And also, I think the pitch book, to Holly's point, is one of the benefits of having that is to be able to send it to potential committee members beforehand so they know who you are, and maybe they don't get on the committee in this case, but they know who you are, but also to share it with financial advisors and vice versa, because then you get the view of the case of, oh, well, they're focusing, here's the financial information, they're focusing on this. That's a great way to look at it, and I think you guys learn legal issues from us as well. So it's a concerted effort, bringing the best people who have the most experience and have the time to do it, and get a product out and make sure it's done beforehand, and work the phones and work your contacts.
Well, and the lawyers get chosen first. So
Yes.
if you're a financial advisor, it would really help you to have shared some of your information with whichever lawyer gets chosen. So why not?
Yep.
Why not be helpful to them?
And that's one of the great things about being a committee attorney too, is that I always feel bad for the FAs because half the time you've got the org meeting on a Friday at 10 o'clock in Delaware before a holiday weekend. And the U.S. trustee office takes a little bit of time, although I've been told by former U.S. trustees that they didn't take that long, although I disagree. It takes a while to interview people and go through the proxies and figure out who it is, and then you go through you interview the 5 or 6 firms, or whatever the number is, and you pick counsel, and then they say to the 50 people, FAs out in the hallway, we're going to wait and do FAs on Tuesday after the holiday weekend, and by the way, we'll do them by phone or something like that, which is just horrible. But as a committee attorney, that once you get selected in a case, what's great is that you then get to hear and see all the pitches by the FAs, which is very interesting, illuminating, and you really see that there's some people who just have phenomenal pitches and know their stuff and can connect. And then there's other people that probably aren't as strong. So if you're in a firm and you get a committee case, particularly if it's a telephonic is horrible because then you don't get the body language and whatnot. But as an attorney, to try to get involved in seeing the FA pitches is great, or even better if you can get a proxy and be on a committee and be part of the decision process and see how it's done. It really is illuminating as to different styles and different focuses.
All right, any comments? So we've identified the opportunity, we've made contact, we've positioned our firm. Now we're to the best part of the discussion. How do you assemble a pitch team? So Josie, how do you go through that process of figuring out who's going to participate? We've touched on some of the topics already. And how can an individual promote themselves during this preparation?
I think as we already discussed, I think probably 40 times now, we really want to introduce people who have the right experience on the team. And identifying those people can be very easy, or it can be a bit difficult. You can go to the people within your firm that work within your insolvency department that have the very similar experience with a particular case or a particular industry, but sometimes you don't have that expertise right at your fingertips. But you may have a larger network within your firm. So finding out who the partners or individuals in your firm who actually have the relevant industry experience, even if they're not insolvency focused, they can help educate you on the peculiarities of a particular industry and what current issues are, and items that are of real concern to a potential client. Going in and not really knowing what the issues are, despite the fact that you have the right insolvency expertise and you may have the proper industry expertise, not melding the two together to actually bring forward the proper issues at a pitch, I think will work against you. In terms of how people can stand out at, bring forward their best qualities at a pitch, I think when you go to a pitch, I think everybody who's involved in the pitch should have a role, a speaking role. The last thing you want to do is have 10 people from your side show up at a pitch and really have 2 people speaking. The people who go to the pitch should be the most experienced. If you have people with a personal connection, bring those people. If you have people within your firm who are known in the industry, bring those people. It's really the relevant people who should attend the pitch, not necessarily, well, we've got 10 people in the office, let's bring them all. Because that, in the end, I think will really hurt you. And your client may think that you misuse resource, you overstaff jobs, you have inexperienced people that'll be working on the engagement. So you really have to tone down the number of people that you bring to a pitch. And I also believe that everybody who is at the pitch should have a speaking role. That way you can highlight, or that person can highlight their experience. The last thing you want is for your client to look at someone who hasn't said a thing throughout the entire pitch and say, well, what do you think? And they're dumbfounded, they don't know what to say. They've now embarrassed themselves, and it makes things a bit awkward. So to really highlight what you know and the experience, and making sure you really have a cohesive pitch. I think what's really key to delivering a perfect pitch is to rehearse. Have everybody who's on the team rehearse as one cohesive team, as opposed to saying, well, you'll do this bit, and you'll do that bit, and you'll do that bit.
Kind of like how we put together this panel.
Don't say that.
Why, yes.
Then you have a bunch of, disjointed presentations in front of a client, and you're not going to make the right impression. What I've done in the past is rehearsed in front of a video camera, which is absolutely terrifying when you hit the replay button. Because now you've uncovered to yourself and to your colleagues, all of your nuances and how you react and how you speak. How many times do you say, what is your tone like? What's your body language like? And it can be pretty embarrassing when you look at it, but it's better to deal with that in your boardroom, in front of a video camera, as opposed to in front of your client or potential client. One thing that I noticed about myself when I did it the first time is the use of the phrase, I guess. I always start my answers with, I guess. Well, I guess I would do it like this. I guess I would contact that person. Well, I'm not guessing. I know what I want to say, but it's that particular phrase, my nuance of using that particular phrase every time I speak that doesn't really instill confidence in people. So I think in order to present properly and to have a great team, those are some of the things that you should consider.
Well, you talk about making sure that everybody has a role. We up here have all done many pitches. We had opportunities to learn and develop our style. What role does a junior person have on a pitch if you're concerned about the size of the team and making sure that everybody is contributing?
I think it goes back to having a role. And I think that showing your depth can be important. But I think it also goes back to the size of the case. If it's a huge case and you've got six partner levels that you need, I think talking about the junior can be more important than bringing them. But if it's a smaller case that's going to be more fee sensitive, I think bringing the junior person along, as long as they have a role, can be very important.
Yeah, when I was at a smaller firm, I would bring the second seat with me, always, to the pitch, because then I could say, and not only are you getting me, this is also your other person who's full-time on the ground.
Yeah.
And she would have a speaking role in the pitch around their own personal experiences. So I also think one of the big pitfalls that people make and I think we're going to talk more about the actual pitch itself, but spending too much time talking about the firm and not enough talking about the case. So I've sat in rooms where somebody's pitching to me and the senior partner, which is now me, launches into this big long-winded explanation about the firm, and you had 30 minutes and now 15 of them are gone and you don't get the time you want to actually discuss the issues at hand.
That's such a committee side, you have 30 minutes. And it's such a company side committee, you get like 10.
Yeah, I think that's really important that you realize that the pitch really isn't about you. It's about your prospective client and addressing their needs. They've already done the research about you. They know who your firm is, how many people you have. That's all on your website. They can do that themselves. It's really tailoring what you have to say to what their needs are, and that's where the research comes in, really knowing what the issues are.
Well, one of the ways we train less experienced people, non-partner level people, to understand how to pitch and what the process is having them be very heavily involved in putting the materials together, talking through the issues. They may come back and say, well, I think the issues are X, Y, and Z, and you say, well, that's all really nice, but those are the company side issues, and we're now pitching the creditor, and you need to understand it from a creditor's perspective. And so, one of the ways to really get heavily involved in this pitch process is not necessarily to be the person now pitching in the room, but putting all the pieces together and really helping support the team that then goes off to pitch the work.
Exactly.
One thing we've also done with a couple instances where juniors who really want to be part of the actual pitch, but for a variety of reasons, including the fact that you don't want to go in there with an over-lawyer or something. One of the things we've done when pitches are in our backyard, it's a relatively decent-sized case, said, why don't you come before the pitch, see what it's like when you show up at a pitch and it's a cocktail party without cocktails. and you really have to work the room and you know, meet people and things like that so that they don't actually get into the pitch, but they see what the process is like and that's something that sometimes can be a good stepping stone. You have to choose it appropriately because you don't want to have announced you've got 10 people here and then only have 4 go in the room, but that's something also that we've used and has worked out pretty well.
Well, there are 2 particular topics within this subject that we all found very interesting. The first is the personality and gender dynamics of preparing for a pitch and ultimately doing the pitch and being the only woman in the room. And I know that Josie has a question for the audience about this.
Just really curious if anyone's experienced or if anyone sees any advantages or disadvantages to an all-woman pitch team arriving at the client.
Go ahead,
Yes,
Karen.
Go ahead, Karen, come on.
It was funny, my colleague called me years ago, she's now a bankruptcy judge in San Diego, and said, I have the chance to do this pitch, and I'd love to have you come do it.
There's a microphone right behind you, if you don't mind.
I've never had anybody say they can't hear me. One of my colleagues out in California called. She's now a San Diego bankruptcy judge and said, I'd love to have you come and pitch with me. It's a potential debtor case in Canada and the U.S., and I think we'd be a great team. And so I flew out for it, and we pitched to an all-male group of people, and they hired us. And afterwards, we were told that, this was a few years ago, we were told the other 2 firms who were pitching, and they were major firms, and we were told that we were the only women who came to any pitch, and that in addition to liking what we had to say, they also felt that, that just hearing from women that we were more direct and honest in how to restructure the company, and we came up with better ideas. And I was surprised that they actually highlighted that fact for me. But so it turned out great. It was a great experience.
Thanks.
Sharon.
Sharon? Please.
Please.
Now, I'll remember a day when Sharon and I were the only women in the room.
That's right. That's right. Although one of the things that
It
I
was
think
when
is,
we were 12, right?
although what's
5 years
interesting
ago.
is I come out of banking and insurance industries, and in the insurance industry, at least on the workout side, it was more hospitable for women, whether you were on the business side or the legal side, than any other industry I've seen from any point of view. But anyway, having said that, having been on the investor side for very large companies for many years, after I retired, I started a firm with a colleague, and we're a 2-person women's team. And we find that it's a benefit for us. We come in and we say we're a 2-person women's team, and we have gotten assignments because of that. I mean, obviously, we've demonstrated the capability, but it has worked in our favor. So I think it's an important thing to know. So any of you out there who are contemplating businesses, there is value in being a woman-owned team.
Thanks, Sharon. Maria?
It was a long walk. It's exhausting. I just want to share an anecdote. I went to a pitch a couple weeks ago, and it was a small case, and there were only 3 firms pitching it. However, my partner and I went. My partner is male, and he was the only male pitching. All the rest of the attorneys there, I think there were 3 firms, all the rest of the attorneys were female. And I said, how's it feel? So maybe the times are changing a little.
Now, did he notice that, Maria, or did you point it out?
I don't know. I did point it out to him. I said, I said, you're in the minority here. And he said, yeah, I kind of noticed that. And I said, I said, times are changing. So,
Sejal?
yeah.
Just curious what kind of a case, you don't have to obviously say the case, like was it pitching to a woman or for women's clothing?
No, it was a manufacturing case. It was a committee case, and it was a crappy little case, as many of them are right now. So, as I said, there weren't a whole lot of people there. But you know, it's funny because lately, you know, it's such a crapshoot when you're pitching a case because there's so many crappy little cases out there. And you go to these cases thinking, God, this is a crappy little case. And you go in, there's 14 people pitching this case, and you're like, why are you people here? This is a crappy little case. You know, and then you go to the next crappy little case, and there's 3 people there, and you're like, okay, you know, that makes sense.
And by crappy, she means special situation with
Exactly. That you should be hiring a firm like me, who is a little less expensive and a little streamlined, and yeah.
Well, let's go to that issue, crappy little case or big case or whatever. Worst waste of your time ever to prepare a bunch of stuff and haul yourself to Delaware or to the Southern District or wherever the case is filed if you don't believe you're actually going to have support in the room. Use your efforts for something where you actually have a chance of winning. I mean, we all have limited resources. Even now, Alex Partners, okay, it's a big place. We have limited resources. We don't go running down to pitch committees, and we do pitch them, unless we believe we have support in the room, because you could have used that extra effort to chase 2 other opportunities that you have where you maybe have a better shot and you can actually do all this preparation, all these phone calls, all these things that we've talked about. I consistently see people show up at committee pitches, and it feels like, why are you here?
Do you think there's a negative connotation if you see firms that keep on showing up without support as well? I mean, you talk about the time element, but what about sort of the perception where you have some firms that just show up for everything? Do you have a view on that?
There are some firms who have such overwhelming committee expertise that they feel if they show up, even if they don't have support in the room because they're so well known, they may get that option. But again, I start to wonder, is that really a good use of resources?
What do you think, Denise?
I'm with Holly. If you don't have a connection, it's most likely going to be a waste of time. Is there an exception to that? But I think it's a very rare exception because the connections.
And the exceptions are fewer and fewer. Like
Yes.
you go back 20 years, it was more often that you could do a crapshoot and end up there.
Well, because think about it. The people who are on the committee, they've talked to firms that they know, and those people are pitching. That's who those folks are going to be pushing. They're not going to be pushing, my firm or Holly's firm, who they have no idea who, they don't know anybody in the firm.
Right.
So if you want to participate on a pitch team, how do you get involved at your firm?
Make yourself useful.
Oh, yeah.
It's as easy. Make my life easier and make yourself useful. And I mean, it's as simple as that. I mean, you do rather than say. You go and get do summaries, reach out for things, do Google researches, come up with something different, prepare summaries, bring an angle of the case that you haven't maybe focused on. And also, let's face it, everybody has connections in the world, and if you have somebody on your level, whatever that may be at a FA firm or that's working, that's either in the space or maybe involved in the case, reach out to them, see what you can do, and say, listen, I know Joe Schmo or whoever it is on the other side of it. I went to law school with her, and I think it would be a great opportunity because we have this personal relationship for me to get involved in this case, and maybe I bring something extra that somebody else doesn't do. And I mean, I think the same thing's true, if you're lucky enough to get the case, and you're not at the pitch and you're back in the office, send an email saying, great, can I get the bylaws and the roster ready? What else do you need? And that's how you get yourself, because you're thinking ahead the next step of what you're going to need to get involved.
Every firm's quals database needs help. Pick the industry that you've worked in or the type of case that you've worked in and volunteer to help clean up. I mean, does anybody raise their hand if they think their firm's quals database is completely up to date and wonderful and ready to go? okay?
This is on video.
So,
And you're under oath.
but it's important. And so, you know, again, Alex Partners, we have people who are employed to do that, but there's never enough of them. There's never enough of their time. We're not going to spend money on extra administrative people. So our own teams, our directors, our VPs, our associates, spend time on that, and it gets noticed by the partners. And then if they've spent the time, or they've spent the time profiling a potential case that's coming up, that's the person I'm going to tap on the shoulder to be part of the pitch team to help us put the materials together and to potentially go along.
Just a show of hands, how many people do that for their firm or in a small firm where you've got limited resources and you have to do a lot of the preparation and the heavy lifting yourself? There's a lot of us out there. All right, we have identified the opportunity. We have made contact. We've positioned our firm. We've assembled our team. So how do we pitch perfect? Each panelist is going to share one tip about what works and what doesn't work. And when we were talking about this, what doesn't work is apparently a general pet peeve, which is fine. But I think we'll start with Melissa.
One thing that works, and I think I'm reiterating what we've discussed here a little bit, is knowing your audience, finding a particular issue to key in that's going to be a central issue in the case, that's a problem for the committee or that's a problem for the debtor, and coming up with a strategy. It's really knowing your audience, knowing your case, picking out that IRS issue where you can knock a claim out and have value added to the committee. I think that really knowing your audience, knowing your information is what will set you apart for getting the pitch. So that's the. Do you want to just do tips 4, or you want both sides of the coin right now?
Let's focus on the positives at this point. Josie.
I think having relevant stories and actually positioning your pitch as a story and as a discussion with the potential client, where it's a two-way discussion as opposed to a one-way discussion, is really important. You draw your audience in, and you have them part of the discussion, and then you can tailor and really understand what it is that they're looking for. The more listening that you do, the more you learn and the more you can address.
I actually saw a quote about that in something I was reading for this, and the quote was, "No one ever listened their way out of a deal."
Yes.
Holly.
Yeah, that was mine, which is to turn it into a discussion. No, but it turned it into a discussion. Make a comment about the situation, and then ask them a question. And you need to be careful about how you structure it, because you don't want it to be something that they don't necessarily want to answer initially, but you elicit commentary from them and try to turn it into a discussion. I think it's very difficult to learn how to do well. But once you do and you convert it into a discussion, then you really have a much higher chance of winning.
You get that personal connection, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I was going to say. But think about it, and I apologize to the men in the room, but we as women, we listen better. Men like to talk.
What?
But I think, and it goes back to, Melissa, you're talking about the fact that you bring some people who are going to have conversations prior to going in. And so listening and being fluid, because you may learn something in that before we go into the pitch conversation that may change the dynamics and change exactly the pitch that you're going to make. And, luckily it's something that we do well.
Well, and you'll notice the dynamic among the panel and how we talk to each other while we're talking to you. That's how it ought to be in the pitch. You need to come to the pitch and show the potential client that you have a relationship with the rest of your team that are sitting at the table with you. And
Chemistry is important.
Chemistry among the team, because they want to know, even particularly if it's a larger case and it's a group of very senior people who may not be from the same office, really important that they get the sense that you are a well-oiled machine, that you're a team who's worked with together, that you're familiar with each other, and whatever kind of banter you can figure out to do among yourselves or handoff really then helps establish that more personal connection with the people you're pitching to.
Yeah, and I find rehearsing, like I said earlier, really helps tie it all in together, so everybody knows what to say when, and when the handoff comes,
Right,
and when to step back.
Like that, let me follow, when you're doing the pitch, let me follow up on something that Melissa said, and that's a transition into the next thing, because you've been listening to Melissa, and they all know we practice somewhat, but it still shows that you have been listening and you practiced and you like the people you work with.
Yep. And even just being as organized as like, okay, are we all going to sit or stand? Because if you've got everybody sitting and standing, you're much more cohesive. Where certain people be like, oh, I got to stand to make this pitch or whatever. Just little things like that seem so simple. It just shows that you're a team and that you've discussed things and that you work together well.
Elaborate on the body language issue just a little bit, because I always find that fascinating. When you're preparing for the pitch, there's usually one person who's taking the lead. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to. And then when you actually do the pitch, that person tends to be the one who's leaning forward, leaning in, as the case may be. Really attracting the attention to themselves. What does the rest of the team do at that point? Should everybody else be leaning in also? Do you let your colleague have their point? And then how do you balance that with the body language of the party you're pitching to? Because sometimes when you're so involved with doing the pitch, you kind of miss the fact that they're pulling back a little bit or they're exhibiting signs of distress. Maybe that's just me. But how do you address the body language issues?
I think you have to be aware of it, number one. And number two, I think if you've actually watched all of us, is when other person's talking, you're leaning in to listen to them and then going out to the group. And I think that's very important, having eye contact with your panelists as well as the committee you're pitching to, and just sort of teeing off of things and letting other people speak and taking breaths so that other people can add comment. I think it's just awareness and practice.
And I think too, the people who are not talking, if they're leaning back, it gives them the opportunity to observe what the other people, the body language of the people you're pitching to. And if you've organized it up front, you can have signals to exchange so that when you see that the person you're pitching to doesn't like what you're saying, you may back off a little bit. I also think when it goes to the standing and sitting, we had a pitch, we were pitching for debtors representation, and so the firm that came out that had been pitching before left, and we came in, they were all sitting. Well, we had organized it standing up, so we had to be very fluid, and it ended up as the only pitch I've ever done sitting down. We got the case, and they were very casual. That was their dynamic, and we just immediately sat down and started having a conversation.
Right.
And so I think it's whether you stand up or sit down, even if you practice it standing up, if you go in and they're sitting down at a table and they have seats in between them and it's clear they want you to sit down, even if I say, would you like us just to sit down? Then go with that. Don't be rigid in what you've rehearsed.
Well, and that's one of the interesting do-si-dos that you do. You all file into the room. Which seat do you take?
Well, typically, whoever's playing the elder statesman role sits in the middle, and the team assembles around them.
Does that mean I'm an elder statesman right now?
Sort of. But it's that role. When I come into a pitch, and I'm not necessarily going to be the partner on the ground, but I am the elder statesman, so to speak, my job is to introduce the firm and my team fairly quickly and then hand it off to the people who are going to be hands-on. And then what I do in the middle of the pitch is try to throw in commentary as appropriate, which endorses Denise, endorses Teresa, endorses them. She did such a great, because she can't say it, right? So she did such a great job on XYZ case. It was just amazing for the following pithy, quick reason, which makes the point to the client around the qualifications of the team. It's that co-endorsement thing. Very, hard to do, but works well. And You know, a lot of firms, I think, get into this very deep rut in the road called the elder statesman is the person that does all the talking in the pitch, and then the committee or the client is sat wondering, well, but who's doing the work?
Be like, why did you bring all these other people?
Right.
Well,
Right.
and I think that's going to lead us into our things we hate section. So,
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen that does not work well at all, and it's not something that I've necessarily utilized, but what I would call the bait and switch, where you bring out, you know, you bring out a particular team typically because they're more well-known in the industry, or they you know, insist on being there sometimes, and think that you can never win a pitch without them, et cetera, but they're going to have absolutely no role in the case. And so oftentimes I've been in pitches where they will ask, well, who's going to work on this case? Am I getting you or am I getting another team, et cetera? And I've through personal experience that sometimes people say, this is the team, I'm going to be on it, you know, I'm going to be leading the charge, et cetera, but it's not the case at all. And I find it hard to believe that they didn't know that at the time. And that it's just, I think as a committee member, maybe you'll get that, you know, maybe you'll support them that time, but you're not going to forget about it. And also it's a very small industry. And the next time you see them, you're going to be like, oh, here you are again. If I ask this question, I may not believe you in your answer. And I think you lose a lot of credibility. And frankly, you want to have the most, you know, you should really have the team that's going to be able to devote the most time, that has the right skill set, not necessarily the person who's been doing it the longest.
okay, so if you encounter a firm like that and you know that's what they're going to do, how do you combat that? It's not like you can say, you know, that guy's not going to be showing up on a daily basis.
That's something that as the negotiations through the committee were to select, you know, a financial advisor. I'm just going to use financial advisor just because I'm in the room that time. You basically, if someone asks you, well, have you worked with them before? You can say, well, you know, here's this, you know, the situation by being professional, but this is your client. You've got to be honest with them and, you know, and just say, I'm not sure that that'll be the case here. I mean, you know, it's a delicate issue, but I think it's something that if you're asked and being truthful and honest with it, or also if they do get the case, then I think it's worthwhile picking up the phone afterwards and saying, hey, you know, the committee, one of the reasons why you were selected is because they're counting on you to be involved in the case, running the team, et cetera. You know, please don't let us down.
That's a great point. Josie?
She took mine.
Melissa takes everybody's good
No,
tips.
That's because you keep going to me first.
Well, I mean, the bait and switch is,
The bait and switch.
it is a pet peeve, but, you know, a pet peeve I have when presenting a pitch is the uninterested person, the person who's on their cell phone, the person whose cell phone rings while you're in the pitch, the person who's not paying attention, the person who doesn't contribute. That's my
And this
pet
is a
peeve.
person on your team, on your pitch team, or this is just the person that you're
Both,
pitching
on either
to?
side, on either side. And it says a lot when the person on the other side of the table is really uninterested in what you have to say.
But they're really paying attention. They
Multitasking.
yes, they're multitasking. They
Multitasking.
know exactly what's going on. Holly?
So, by the way, what do you do in that? And it's hard to do it, but I've only seen a couple of people ever do it well. But once they get off that phone, try to direct a comment to whatever their interest is, if you know who they are. You know, if for example, I'm pitching to a management team and it's the CIO who is on the phone, then I might say, you know, the impact of this process on IT can be really incredible, and one of the, you know, and so to try to direct something to them to draw them back into the conversation, if you can do that without, you know, softly, but it's very important. Pet peeve, people who don't listen to themselves. They don't gauge the room. They go on too long. They're generally male. Sorry, but that's true. And they're more interested in hearing themselves talk than actually watching the dynamic in the room and watching the dynamic with their team. That's my biggest pet peeve in the world, and generally those teams are not successful.
Yeah. And I agree with everything folks said. I think mine is overselling your qualifications. having represented debtors and committees and interviewing people, because I'm going to figure it out, and it's not going to be pretty down the road. So if you have, if there is something that you don't have on your team, say it up front. You know what? We haven't handled a case of this dollar size, but we have handled here's the complexities we think that you're going to find, and we've handled these, and here's how we dealt with them. So if there's something that you don't have on your team, acknowledge it up front, because if we find it out later on, we're not going to be happy, and it's going to impact the case, and maybe adversely, and also the ability for you to get hired again down the road.
Allison?
The pet peeve with the generally male guy who talks too much in the room and overtakes the presentation. How do you handle that? How do you address that? You know, I have one guy and we go in and maybe we're doing an hour presentation. I've prepared a deck or something, and he'll literally say, well, you know, Allison prepared this, but let me tell you about myself, and go on for the rest of the, and we've tried to stack it so his speaking part is at the end, or, you know, 3/4 of the way, not so he doesn't take over the whole time. But do you have any suggestions for how to deal with that?
Well, if I had anything to say about it, he wouldn't come next time. But setting that aside, because it's typically a more senior
Assuming he's the elder statesman.
Right. Assuming it's a more senior partner, you have a sidebar conversation with him. And so that's, by the way, how this elder statesman role evolved, at least in the firms that I have been with, which is that the partner, the senior partner, who is the most senior partner, is intentional to not talk about themselves and to talk about the team. And so maybe what you do is you say to him, I really need, because everybody knows your qualifications, because you know you are wonderful and known worldwide. So therefore, I really need you to help endorse the rest of our team, because you know the potential client knows you're not going to do it by yourself. And so your endorsement of the rest of your team members is really important to us. And so could you please play this specific role for us, again, because everybody knows how qualified and wonderful you are.
And you taught me everything I know.
Right, but we really need you to do this, you know, and you can try it that way. That would be my suggestion. It has worked, and people have used it on me. So
And probably one of the worst things you could do is just try to step in and not be a team during the pitch, and try to have that dynamic play out in front of a client. Which,
if the table's covered, you could kick them.
Yeah, that was my knee-jerk reaction, which yes, but.
And Allison, you have sons. Just go all mom-like on that. Now, I need you to do this. You're not going to do that. It can be very effective. We've got a couple of minutes left. Are there any questions, burning issues, anything that you would like to know that you don't think that we tried to cover in our fairly comprehensive outline?
Hi, I'm Suzanne. I don't know many of you, but I used to work for a government agency, and I represented the agency on committee, so I spent a lot of time on the other side of the table. And of course, the worst pet peeve is when the team actually doesn't agree with itself, all males, and they all have a different opinion on the case. They don't get hired either. But now I'm on closer to your side of the table, and my firm represents clients specifically on pension issues. So we don't generally, when it's a creditor, we don't pitch creditors directly. Someone brings us in. And they usually bring us into the debtor as well, or we have a personal connection that goes into the debtor. And you talked about sharing information between, if you're an FA, share it with law firms share it with FAs. And the question is, how expansive do you get with that? And I'll give you just an example or two, which is we often get calls from one or two people, FAs, perhaps pitching the exact same group or pitching two different groups who want our expertise and then want to pitch and say we can bring them into this, and it would be a conflict. So who do you talk to? Do you talk to everyone? Do you say, I've already talked to someone else, but keep me in mind if that happens? If in one case, in fact, we were planning on pitching debtor to be directly because we have that connection, but also got asked to help when someone who was pitching an ad hoc group that was being put together. So how do you handle that? Or are we just weird? And I'm okay with that too.
You want to take that one?
Okay, let's see. Well, if you have the ability to bring them to the table and you have already made a decision as to who you're bringing with you, I think you have to just be honest that this time I've already linked up. However, in the more normal pitching situation where it is a potential committee pitch or people potentially circling around the banks, and I'm in at the debtor and I get a phone call, I try to return as many as I do. Now, I will tell you, in case you have not heard, people in our industry will give, on the debtor side, more information to the one or two firms they want to have be the winners in the case than the other ones that call them. So we'll all give everybody some amount of information, and we may give one or two tips to the firms that we would like to steer to win when everyone is on a relatively level playing field qualifications-wise. It does happen. It's all about then working those relationships and having those relationships pre-established.
Because often they're bringing us in. We're not bringing them in. They're coming to us and saying they want to supplement their pitch, talking about the pension issue. And so
well, there's no problem. If someone's going to bring you in, you could be brought in by any one of 3 or 4 different firms, and I at least don't see any problem with you being potentially linked to whoever wins. So why wouldn't you be?
So if you were calling me and saying, I don't mean to be dense, but if you were calling me and saying, Suzanne, tell us about the pension issue and all the rest, and we're going to go talk to the ad hocs and we want to add this to our team, and I get a call the next day from Josie who says, Suzanne, we're thinking of pitching the ad hocs and we want to talk about the pension issue. Would you be okay if we talked to Josie, or would you feel that we had committed to going with your group?
Well, it sounds like you're a fairly narrow segment. I mean, in my case,
Yes.
I would say talk to Josie, because Josie may win and I may not, and then you won't get potentially won't get the case, or maybe you will. But
Right. No, it goes both ways. Some men get very territorial and some don't. It's hard for me to judge who's going to feel which way. And my question is really, in general, is there an expectation that if once I talk to you and share with you, I'm not going to do it with somebody else?
And
no, I
Suzanne,
think
how
the
many of
expectation is it's all the other way.
How many of those calls did you get when you were at the PBGC?
When
because you're kind of known as PBGC Suzanne.
Right.
If there's a question,
Yeah.
call you.
So I got calls from everyone. I got calls from lawyers, and I got calls from FAs, and I got calls from debtors. And I answered everyone and gave them all, I answered everyone's questions that were asked. And if I knew you, and I had dealt with you, and I knew I could deal with you in the future, I would tell you what you didn't ask me that you should know.
Exactly. To my
And that's
point.
how every debtor is, and it's how creditors are as well. Because, when you talk about the bait and switch, we'd see that all the time because we were active in so many cases. And you would go to these meetings and you would say, okay, here's this group, here's this person, and I'm actually not even going to bring them into the committee room. I'm not going to advocate in any way for them, regardless of whether they ask, because I know they're going to do all the talking and I'm never going to see them again. I'm kind of okay with never seeing them again, but I don't want to actually hear them do all the talking either. So it was a very interesting dynamic from that side of the table.
I think you're free to talk to people as long as you don't commit to someone, and as long as you're open and honest, and if someone says, well, we don't want you to talk, we want you to have an exclusive relationship, relationship, that's the key. But I think, especially on the committee side, I know the company side is a little bit different, but I think everybody realizes that they each have their connections, and there's nothing wrong with speaking to people and helping people out, and maybe this isn't the right case for us, but you know what, we made a connection, and I can call you up and have your expertise and vice versa.
And you should if you have a pension issue.
I will.
I still talk to everybody about them, so
No.
it's fine.
But it's tough. I think you just have to sort of go with it and just not overcommit. And not say something you can't follow through with.
The one thing we do is we won't, if we hadn't already approached a debtor, we won't approach a debtor if we've talked to people who are approaching other creditors until they get through their process. That, to us at least, feels a little wrong, so.
Thank you for that question. We are officially out of time. Thank you very much for being an excellent audience. This was a great panel to be part of. Thank you to all of the wonderful women at IWIRC who put this together. We hope we prepared you to go pitch perfect. So go out and pitch.
Okay, again, I just want to briefly thank Melissa Hager, Josie Parisi, Teresa Cole, Holly Etlin, and Denise Del Powell for their time being here today and the wonderful tips that you've provided us all in getting us prepared to go pitch. IWIRC has a small token of appreciation and thank you for your time here this morning. And again, please give them a round of applause.